Hi hello everyone, welcome to dearb. This is Aswathy Alex, and I would like to remind you all by saying is that being disciplined is the greatest form of self-love. And today's topic for discussion is that by the end of our freedom struggle, we could find a myriad varieties of these nationalist leaders. We could have ranging from the moderates to extremists to Gandhian types of freedom strugglers, and we could find militant forms of nationalist leaders, especially our Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and we even had our great famous Bhagat Singh, but he was unfortunately executed by these British governments. But what was something that set them forward to it? That is, what is a precursor for all these conditions? What was a breeding ground for these extreme form of nationalist leaders in India? So we're going to discuss all that in detail, so stay tuned. So, militant nationalism or radicals, forms of freedom strugglers, were present during the early 1980s, and by the initiations of our Swadeshi movement, which was started because as a reactionary movement towards partition of Bengal during the 1905, we had a Swadeshi movement, and it was because of that that set a concrete motion or a concrete shape for these nationalist leaders who were from the radical side. So, militant form of nationalism wasn't just a byproduct of Swadeshi movements or a reaction to these great partition of Bengal, but it was actually because of reactionary policies of both internal and the external policies of the British government. So the first predetermined was to be an educated person, an educated, awakened person to understand that the policies and initiations started by the British government was solely made for their own convenience, and especially during the plague that we happened during the 1980s up until the 1900s, lakhs of people died. But even then, they didn't do much further contributions to these famines and these grief-stricken people. Every policy is initiated by the Britishers reflected their forms of selfishness and aggrandizations, and they weren't even ready to listen to these petitions given by these moderates during the early Indian National Congress period. And in spite of being all these people getting educations and getting adequate qualifications for getting a job, they were denied jobs of higher stratas or higher sectors of the administrations. And increasing forms of unemployment and underemployment really increased their frustrations to a border limit that they started to express in different forms of expressionism. So, despite increasing of employment and despite being qualified and educated enough, they were underemployed or unemployed during those periods, and this really drastically increased their frustrations among the youth. And do not forget that forms of discriminations in ranks, when you are an Indian, you're getting a very lower rank. It doesn't matter what your qualifications are. And if you belong to a white class, that is, if you belong to a British class, you'll be given much higher post. And even people of the similar post of both shared by a white and an Indian, your emoluments, your salaries will be distinguished among the both. And with these repression and discriminatory policies by these white superiors, yet the self-confidence of the Indians boosted, with especially with all these great leaders during those period. We had lots of extremist leaders during the International Congress initiations, and they were the ones who channelized these youth in the right manner and the right order, and getting influences from the other international places, especially from the Japan being a nation and they being an industrial power. So this really inspired them to a larger extent, that knowing that taking in pride of being a nation, being an oriental form of a country, and knowing that we ourselves are being capable enough to look after us, and we don't need foreigners to come over here and look after us. This thoughts and philosophies really did motivate them to take actions on their own hands. And we should also know that these repressions and the reactions by these Britishers were in almost direct proportions to these increasing militant nationalism by these youth. The more repressions and discriminations that they faced, the more forms of reactionary and not to forget the militant forms of nationalism took place in during those periods. So when these militant nationalism when started or initiated, when the inception started, we did have another forms of expression by these nationalist leaders, that is moderates were there present with their three famous P's, that is petitions, protest, and prayer. So they were having a very forms of moderate, or more importantly, a passive forms of expressing to the Britishers, to pleading them to bring about reforms, to pleading them, begging for them for forms of development in our country. So these extremists were not happy with them, especially the partition of Bengal weren't be able to stop by these moderates. So this really riled them up. So partition of Bengal was just one among the other policies initiated by the great repressor, that is Lord Curzon. Lord Curzon's policies of administrations was omission, commissions, and missions. So there were lot many other repressive policies and other forms of administrative structures taken up by him, and that is Official Secrets of Act, Indian Universities Act, Calcutta Universities Act. So many acts were there which was really in the contradiction with the great aspirations of the masses. And then with the initiation of the Swadeshi movement, which was right after the partition of Bengal, that was in 1905, it was sort of like these militant nationalist leaders got a platform to express themselves, to vent out their frustrations. And not to forget that Swadeshi movement was given a green signal by these moderates. So they were given all these directions and right ways to go forward by these great leaders who channelized the energies, and they showed the Britishers this is what we're capable of, and this is what which led them to what we had later on in the years. So this was the precursor, or this is what the predetermined situation which was existing during the early 20th century, which led to a concrete forms or concrete shaping of all these militant nationalism that we had later on. So I really hope that you could understand much clarity about it, and much was discussed here. And if there's any discussions or doubts regarding the same, you could just ping me, or you could just put on in the comment section. And I would like to take this opportunity to remind you all that I've started with the GS crash course. It's in an app called dearb IAS Academy, and the link is provided in the descriptions, and you could take that, you could attend the classes. And we did start on with few classes for the past few weeks and all, but you could watch it, and we could go together and achieve the dream of being a civil servant officer. So bye all for now.